I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. 3 weeks before my son's wedding, my phone lit up with a message. It was from Chloe Bennett, his bride-to-be. The words were brief, casual, final. Donna, for the vibe of our special day. Please don't come. I read it twice, then a third time, hoping perhaps the letters might rearrange themselves into something kinder. They did not. For the vibe, as if my presence, the woman who had raised Mason for 32 years, would somehow poison the air she wanted to breathe on her wedding day. Before I could swallow the sting, my phone rang. It was Vanessa Winters, the wedding planner. Her voice was crisp, professional, detached. "Mrs. Harris, I'm just calling to confirm. We've been told you won't be attending." She paused, fingers audibly tapping at her keyboard. "But of course, your deposit remains non-refundable. $85,000. The vineyard, the suites, the chef." I set down the porcelain teacup in my hand, a memento from Napa, bought decades ago on a trip with my late husband, Robert. A fine crack ran down its side, a hairline fracture that never quite reached the rim. I'd kept it all these years, this imperfect vessel that still held tea without spilling a drop. I tapped it gently against the table. A hollow sound filled my quiet kitchen. "Cancel the vines," I said, my voice steady and calm. "Cancel the suites. Cancel the chef. I own the vineyard and the hotel next door." Silence. Pure silence. I could almost hear her breath catch. Paper shuffled. A chair scraped. She had not expected that. None of them had. People often mistake quiet for weakness, but quiet can hold teeth. Quiet can redraw lines. That day, I learned again that a vessel may be cracked, but it still holds water if you know how to carry it. I'm Donna Harris, 62 years old. I buried my husband Robert nearly 10 years ago, and since then, I've lived in the house we bought together, the one with the red brick porch and the roses I planted myself. My son Mason grew up there, eating pancakes at the counter every Saturday morning, rushing out the door with his backpack half open, calling, "Bye, Mom." He is the center of my life, even now. I thought when he found a partner, I'd be gaining a daughter, not losing a son. But families don't always write the stories we expect them to. Chloe entered Mason's life like a summer storm fast, dazzling, and impossible to ignore. She is younger than Mason by 6 years, with a sharp eye for aesthetics. Everything had to look perfect: the venue, the flowers, the pictures, and apparently the guest list. The first time she visited Harris Vineyards, she thought it was charming. She didn't know the vineyard had been built on decades of my sweat and Robert's dream. She didn't know that the suites her bridal party had reserved, or the menus planned by Chef Laurent, all traced back to me. That was by choice. I had never told her. It's strange, isn't it? Sometimes we hide our strength to make others comfortable. We don't want to appear as if we're showing off or intimidating. We keep quiet, but the cost of silence can be steep. I did not start out powerful. I started out tired, broke, and stubborn, standing beside Robert on a patch of soil no bank wanted to finance. The realtor called it a hobby vineyard, which is a polite way of saying it lost money. Robert ran his fingers through the dust and said, "We can teach it to live." I believed him because he spoke softly, and soft words can move rock when you repeat them long enough. The first winter we owned it, the vines slept while the bills did not. I worked days at a medical clinic and nights at the tasting room we built from a shed. Robert repaired pumps, patched hoses, and learned to read the wind. My sister Eleanor came on weekends with a thermos of soup. She packed cases until her knuckles cracked. We laughed at ourselves. 2 women arguing over labels while Robert tuned the tractor. We learned the land like a body where frost bit, where sunlight lingered, where the soil swallowed water, and where it held. We lost a season, then 2, before something turned. A harvest pressed clean. A critic noticed. A restaurant in town poured our white by the glass. When Mason was little, he rode the forklift like a pirate ship and ate grapes until his stomach hurt. He watched me count tips and asked if we were rich. "Not yet," I said. "We're building something that will not embarrass you." He giggled and tucked a cork behind his ear like a pencil. Then the heart attack came like a thief. Robert was gone in the space between one breath and the next. The vineyard went quiet. I sat on the porch with the porcelain teacup we had bought in Napa, a fine crack around the belly, and I decided to keep the vineyard because grief needed work more than rest. I learned the parts Robert had hidden from me to be kind: the spreadsheets, the tax calls, the lender who smiled when we were small and grimaced when we dared to grow. I made mistakes and paid for them. I learned the law that protects a brand and the clause that cancels a lie. I bought the parcel next door when a family moved away. I bought the inn when the owner wanted out. Harris Vineyards and Lodging became a quiet chain of rooms and vines under one signature. By the time Mason was in college, the company was worth about $60 million. The appraiser said with his cautious pencil. I did not tell Mason that number. I did not want money to walk into our kitchen at home before wisdom did. I wanted my son to feel like a man, not a beneficiary. So I stayed quiet. I let him think I loved the plants and the people more than the ledgers, which was true, but not the whole truth. Eleanor asked once why I did not show the whole picture. Because power can bruise a child if you hand it to him too early, I said. Give him a handrail, not a throne. She nodded and kept packing cases. We both thought silence was tenderness. We were not wrong. Not then. But silence grows habits in others, too. It tells them you will carry the heavy things and ask for nothing. It tells them your name can be left off the program and the bill will still be paid. It tells a bride she can curate a vibe and delete a mother. I stayed quiet so love could breathe. Then quiet became a door they shut in my face. That morning when Chloe texted me, I set the Napa cup down and felt the crack with my thumb. A vessel can be flawed and faithful at the same time. You just need the right hand to lift it. I decided to be my own steady hand. The morning after Chloe's text, my phone did not rest. First, it was Mason. His voice carried that practiced calm he uses when he's nervous. Mom, let's keep this light. Chloe just wants the day to feel easy. No pressure, no family tension. He said the words as if I were the tension itself. As if my presence were a storm cloud. I answered slowly, careful not to spill heat. I thought weddings were about family standing together. He sighed. Silence stretched. Then he repeated, It's for the vibe. Mom, just let us have this. Not long after, Chloe called herself. Her voice cracked, almost rehearsed. She cried softly, telling me she worried I would make people uncomfortable. You're strong. And sometimes that can feel intimidating, she said. I listened, not correcting her, not feeding the performance. She wrapped her words in fear, but left no space for my dignity. I thought of the years I had carried her fiancé on my hip, wiping jam from his chin, sewing patches on his jeans. Intimidating was a strange word for love that had worked its hands raw. By afternoon, a new number appeared. Patricia Bennett, Chloe's mother, introduced herself in a tone polished with sweet varnish. Donna, dear, I hope you understand. This is their day. Best to let the young ones make their choices without interference. Interference. That was the word she chose for a mother attending her only son's wedding. I thanked her politely and ended the call. When kindness is sharpened into a blade, the cut stings deeper. Later, Vanessa the planner circled back with careful phrasing. Mrs. Harris, I'm confirming that all contracts remain intact. The bride's side indicated your deposit should be honored. The event will proceed smoothly even if your attendance is not expected. Not expected. Another phrase for erased. She was trying to keep her tone neutral, but I heard the current beneath it. Money in, name out. I set my notebook on the counter and wrote everything down. Date, time, exact words. I tapped the record button on my phone before the next call. Gaslighting is slippery, but paper holds still. They might recast my presence as drama, but the record would remain. That evening, I forwarded the notes and recordings to James Chen, the attorney who has advised me since Robert's passing. James read fast and spoke faster. Donna, you are the contracting party of record. Do you still hold signature authority? I opened the email folder Robert had once labeled Iron Keys. At the top sat the scanned agreement. 10 years old, bearing my signature alone. The authority had never been transferred. I felt my pulse slow even as James confirmed it. Then no one else has the right to alter attendance terms while retaining your funding. That is misrepresentation at minimum. I closed the laptop and stared at the crack in my porcelain cup. I thought of Mason's sigh, Chloe's tears, Patricia's sweet poison. Each voice tried to make me smaller. Each call dressed cruelty in reasonableness. And yet, tucked inside an old email, the truth sat firm. Still, the question nagged, should a mother fight her own child on paper even when the law stood on her side? Should I be the one who drags contracts into a church aisle? Love whispers, yield, dignity answers. Stand. I sat in that space between them, the weight of motherhood pressing against the weight of self-respect. I poured a little wine into the cracked cup, watching the liquid pool without leaking. The vessel held because I knew how to carry it. I had held silence for decades to keep peace. But silence, I realized, was being twisted into consent, and I could not consent to my own erasure. Sophia Rodriguez knocked on my back door just after sunrise. Jacket zipped, hair tied with the red bandana she saves for pruning. She is 55, a widow like me, and she has worked these rows long enough to know each trellis by sound. She stepped inside without ceremony and held out a book with both hands. "For you," she said. "From him." The book was our old season ledger, the one Robert kept before I typed his notes into spreadsheets. The cover had gone soft with years. The spine sighed when I opened it. Inside was his handwriting, careful dates and weather sketches, circles around mildew, stars for the rows that behaved. Sophia pointed to a margin where he had written in block letters, "Hold fast." We sat at the kitchen table. Light came through the curtains in narrow ladders. I set out 2 cups and reached for the porcelain one from Napa. The hairline crack shone like a pale thread around its belly. I touched it with my thumb. Sophia watched my hand and laughed softly. "You remember the day it chipped?" she asked. I did. We had been late, and the chain on the tractor slipped. I ran to fetch the thermos, tripped on a hose, and the cup bounced across the porch like a stone over water. I cried over ceramic while Robert crouched to gather the pieces. "Don't throw it away," he said, holding the largest shard to the light. "The crack tells a story. Besides, it still holds. We just have to carry it right." He glued the handle back on that night and drew a tiny line in the ledger next to the frost forecast. A private joke I only catch now. Sophia flipped pages until she found a spread from the year before he died. Notes on canopy. A small heart beside the block we planted the week Mason turned 10. "He wrote so you wouldn't forget," she said. "But you haven't forgotten." "They have." She meant the people building a wedding. All surface, no roots. I poured tea. The steam curled, then thinned. Sophia cupped her hands around her mug and looked at me steady. "Mrs. Harris," she said, "they want to erase a story, not a cup. They think a vibe is more important than the woman who made the field ready." She reached across and pressed the ledger's edge so it would lie flat. "You kept quiet so the fruit could speak. Now they are using quiet to pretend you were never here." Her words landed without fuss, like winter rain sinking into well-tilled soil. I traced the ink where Robert had drawn a tiny cluster and wrote, "Third leaf finally sings." The page smelled of dust and eucalyptus. Outside, the wind moved down the rows. "What do I do?" I asked, "to keep from breaking the cup?" Sophia tilted her head. "You carry it like you always have. 2 hands. No apology. And if someone tries to snatch it, you hold tighter, not to hurt them, but to keep the tea from spilling." She tapped the ledger again. "There is a way to stand that is not a shove." I closed the book and set it beside the cup so the crack and the words "hold fast" were in the same frame. "Thank you," I said. Sophia shrugged. "He told me once you were the root and he was the trellis. Roots do not brag. They also do not move." I breathed steady as new winter. She rose, kissed my hair like a daughter, and left for the vines. The gate at Harris Vineyards is iron, painted black, and heavy enough that it groans when I swing it open. Beyond it, the rows rolled down into the valley, winter bare but steady, vines tied like patient hands behind their backs. I stood there with my scarf pulled close, holding the folder James had brought. He parked his sedan beside the stone pillar and walked to me with that quick lawyer stride, papers tucked under his arm. "Mrs. Harris," he said, businesslike. "We have options. None of them require shouting." He placed the folder on the flat of the gatepost and opened it with 2 fingers. Inside were 3 tabs, each a path written in black letters. Option 1, suspension pending verification. That means we freeze all vendor activity until authority is clarified. No contracts are broken, but nothing moves forward either. It's a pause, not a strike. He looked at me, making sure I understood. Option 2, claim of unauthorized contact. That clause states no third party may alter agreements without written approval of the contracting authority. Since you never signed over your rights, any instruction from Mason, Chloe, or Patricia has no legal weight. We can nullify their requests. He tapped the page. And option 3, defamation. They suggested to vendors that you were unstable. That opens a door we could walk through if you choose. I listened while the wind threaded itself through the bare canes, making a sound like paper torn gently. The gate pressed cold against my palm. James's tone was precise, not cruel. He was offering tools, not revenge. "They will say you are ruining a wedding," he added, softer. "Our answer will be simple. You are protecting agreements you lawfully hold. This is not about anger. It is about contract." I thought of Mason's sigh on the phone, Chloe's tears that felt rehearsed, Patricia's sweet voice, sharp underneath, each one a blade telling me to yield for the vibe, yield, yield, yield. But here in James's folder was the other voice, the one Robert once taught me. Hold fast. I opened the folder wider. The defamation clause looked harsh in print. Words about damages, injury to reputation, recovery of costs. I imagined courtrooms, reporters, Mason shrinking in the back row. My chest tightened. That was not my path. But suspension pending verification, that one rang true. It was clean, temporary. Enough to remind them I was still here without tearing everything down. I lifted the pen James handed me. My hand did not shake. "Are you sure?" he asked. I nodded. "This is not retaliation. This is clarity. We suspend until the record is corrected." I signed my name, Donna Harris, across the bottom. Black ink on white. No raised voice, no slammed door, only paper. For a long moment, we said nothing. The only sound was wind moving through vine leaves left from last harvest, brown and curled, rattling like thin bones. I looked down the rows that Robert once walked, hands brushing tendrils, whispering forecasts only the plants believed. The valley waited, quiet, as if it too had signed with me. James closed the folder and tucked it back under his arm. "They will know by morning. Vendors must obey the suspension order. No event moves forward without you." I thanked him. He shook my hand firmly, then left me at the gate. I stayed, one hand on cold iron, one hand in my pocket holding the key. Silence has many shapes. Sometimes it is weakness, a swallowed word. Sometimes it is the strongest act you can make. That day at the gate, silence was my answer. The vines did not move, but the wind did. It swept down the valley, carrying with it the message, no text, no tear, no polished phrase could erase. I am still here. The suspension order went out at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. James sent the notices with his usual clipped language. Nothing ornamental, just weight carried in plain print. By 9 a.m., the dominoes began to tip. First came Vanessa, the planner. Her voicemail was strained, formal. "Mrs. Harris, we've received legal instruction to halt all coordination for the Harris Vineyard event until verification of authority is complete. Please confirm if this is accurate." She had built her reputation on smoothing storms. Now she was caught in one she could not spin. I did not call her back. The document spoke for me. Next was Marcus Williams, the general manager of the inn beside the vineyard. He knew me well enough not to waste words. His email was one line per instruction, all blocks released. "No new reservations accepted until you lift the freeze." The hotel lobby that morning would have echoed with unanswered questions. Guests redirected, clerks following scripts they did not understand. But Marcus followed mine. Then Chef Laurent called, his French vowels clipped short. Madame Harris, we received notice to suspend all tastings, menu planning, and catering prep. Shall I inform my staff to stand by? I told him yes. He did not argue. He had once watched me fire a supplier who tried to slip in inferior cuts. He knew when a decision was not up for discussion. Each confirmation landed like a stone in still water, sending rings outward. The family had treated my role as decorative, a woman with a checkbook and no spine. Now the industry recognized the line had shifted. I spoke little, only a few acknowledgments, and then I hung up the phone. Silence did the work. I stepped outside and walked toward the storage house. The morning air carried the cold bite of February, sharp enough to wake me. Inside, rows of oak barrels stretched into shadow. The scent of wood and ferment holding the air close. My hand brushed the curve of one cask. The sound it gave back was hollow, a soft thud that traveled through my palm. Each barrel was a contract. 2. Waiting. Holding. Not yet released. The vineyard was still. Pruning would begin in March. The vines stood bound and leafless. But beneath the soil, they were alive, storing energy for spring. I thought of that as I listened to the dry creak of wood around me. Things look dormant when they are only gathering. The notices had gone out to Vanessa, to Marcus, to Laurent. By noon, the entire chain would know the pause was mine to control. No explanation, no dramatics, just a suspension stamped with my authority. I sat on a crate and let the silence build. My phone buzzed with numbers I recognized and chose not to answer. Sometimes the most powerful word is nothing at all. Let them sit with it. Let them learn the weight of an absence they tried to design. The barrels answered me again when I rose, the small knock of wood against wood. It sounded like agreement. They gathered at Patricia's house the night the suspension took hold. Word reached me through neighbors and through silence. When no one calls, you know they are circling. Her living room was set up like a committee hall, chairs pulled close, voices rising through the walls. They talked about tours, about vendors who might still take them, about whether another vineyard 2 valleys over would accept a last-minute booking. Each suggestion ran against the stone of reality. The industry knew my signature, and no one wanted to cross it. Patricia's voice carried the sharpest edge. We cannot lose face over this. The invitations are printed. People will talk. Her fear was not about love or vows or even Chloe's happiness. It was about appearance. To Patricia, dignity was borrowed from other people's eyes. Mason sat at the edge of the room. He said little. His silence pressed against the walls heavier than any word. I imagined him tugging at his shirt cuff, looking down, not wanting to choose. A son between 2 women, and the only tool he reached for was quiet. They considered threats. Someone said, "We'll move the wedding. She can't own every acre." But they didn't know how far my holdings stretched, how carefully Robert and I had tied each thread. The pause order had already made its rounds. Phones were answered with polite refusals. Availability suddenly vanished. Patricia must have felt the walls close in. Yet she pressed harder. We will not let Donna dictate. She has always wanted control. What Patricia didn't reveal that night, what I would learn later through Marcus, who heard it from the hotel's event coordinator, was the truth about the Bennett family finances. Patricia and her husband William had promised Chloe a dream wedding, but their investments had taken a severe hit 6 months ago. They had emptied savings accounts to maintain the illusion of prosperity, but the wedding's cost was crushing them. They needed my money but wanted to exclude my presence. The deposit I'd paid covered nearly 70% of the wedding costs. Patricia wasn't just fighting for social standing. She was desperately trying to hide financial failure from her wealthy friends. The next day, Eleanor came to me, my older sister, her hair now silver, shoulders bent from years of labor that never earned enough rest. She found me by the roses where the wind pulled at the loose canes. "Donna," she began softly, "don't push Mason into a corner. He's just trying to start his life. Weddings are fragile things. You don't want to be the reason he breaks with his wife before it begins." I set down the shears I had been using and wiped my palms. She looked at me with pleading eyes. Not hostile, worried. Eleanor had seen enough family cracks to know how quickly they spread. "I don't want him to lose face," she continued. "If this suspension stays, people will whisper that the groom's mother wrecked the plans. Let him stand tall. Don't make him bow before his in-laws." I studied her. For years, she had been my companion in silence, helping me load crates, keeping Robert's notes safe. Now, she wore Patricia's worry like borrowed clothing. I asked slowly, "She fears he will lose face, or that I will lose myself." The words caught her off guard. She opened her mouth, then closed it. My question was not sharp. It was steady. A mirror held up. She blinked at it. "I never wanted to erase him," I said. "I wanted to stand beside him, but they asked me to vanish, to give money and disappear. What kind of lesson does that teach?" Eleanor shifted her weight, eyes lowering. "You know, Patricia, she's terrified of gossip. She thinks if Chloe's family looks weak, people will judge. She would rather paint you as the villain than admit she can't pay for the picture she promised." There it was. The fear behind Patricia's cruelty, not hatred of me, but dread of humiliation. She believed image was survival. I breathed in and let the valley air steady me. "Dignity," I said, "does not come from silencing others. It comes from standing true even when eyes are on you. I am not the one teaching Mason shame. I am teaching him that boundaries are not betrayal." Eleanor had no answer. She looked at the roses, nodded once, and left me standing with the shears still in my hand. The rumors reached me before noon, carried not by family but by strangers. A florist I once hired sent a message. "Sorry, Mrs. Harris. People are saying you're blocking your son's wedding, making it hard for the bride." Then came a second note, then a third. By evening, the story had hardened into gossip. The rich mother who wanted control. The widow who couldn't let go. Anonymous messages found their way into my inbox. One read, "Shame on you. Let them have their day." Another, harsher, "Money doesn't buy love. Stop ruining things." No signature, only shadows behind a screen. I stared at the words, the sharpness of them. None of the writers knew me, yet they felt certain. The deposit had become the symbol. $85,000 painted as a leash. They said Chloe was humiliated, that Mason was caught between an overbearing mother and a wedding collapsing around him. I knew how easily perception shapes truth. It did not matter that I had given quietly, that the contracts bore my name. In whispers, I was the villain. I showed James one of the messages during our call. He adjusted his glasses, read it once, and set the paper down. "People always tell stories to protect their own shame," he said. "This is noise. Our filings are clean. Vendors know where authority lies. Let the documents answer, not your voice." "Do I reply?" I asked. Old. "No. The more you defend yourself in rumor, the more real the rumor becomes. Silence in law is not weakness. It's strategy." I folded the printout, slid it under the porcelain cup on my desk. Tea had spilled earlier, leaving a brown stain that bled into the paper's edge. The ink blurred, but the cruelty remained. I pressed the cup down gently, a cracked cup, a stained page. Both carried stories people preferred not to see. Outside, the vineyard was quiet, workers trimmed, tied, prepared for spring, each motion practical, unbothered by gossip. Grapes did not listen to rumors. They listened to water and light. I let that thought steady me. The phone buzzed again with another notification. I didn't look. The weight of the cup was enough. What I discovered later, through Sophia, who had heard it from her cousin who worked at Patricia's country club, was that Patricia herself was the source of the most vicious rumors. She had systematically told her social circle that I was mentally unstable since Robert's death, that I had always been jealous of Chloe, and that I was using my money to manipulate my son. She had even suggested to some that I had threatened to disinherit Mason if he went through with the wedding. Each lie was carefully crafted to make my legal action seem like the desperate move of a bitter woman rather than the legitimate response of a businesswoman protecting her contracts. Patricia's campaign was calculated to isolate me, to make me the villain so completely that I would back down rather than face social ostracism. She understood the power of community perception, especially for a widow. What she didn't understand was that I had weathered worse storms than gossip. The conference room smelled faintly of leather and ink, the kind of air that carries weight without sound. I sat at the head of the table, the Vineyard seal etched into the glass wall behind me. Young. James had gathered 2 of his associates, both younger, both alert. The trust documents lay in front of us, a stack thick enough to anchor the moment. He began by reading from the top page. Harris Family Trust, revised 2021, establishes Mrs. Donna Harris as sole trustee. Ownership includes Vineyard Properties, hotel subsidiary, catering division, and brand rights. No amendment filed, no successor named. His voice did not need to rise. Each word landed like a gavel. One associate, a woman named Michelle, flipped to a section and tapped her pen. Here, Brand Protection Clause language states that any public defamation or misrepresentation affecting the owner's reputation allows immediate suspension of services until resolution. Intent is not punitive. It's to shield the integrity of the brand and event experience. She looked at me directly. That covers the gossip. Mrs. Harris, if they say you're unstable, if they paint you as the obstacle, that counts. The room was quiet for a beat. I let my eyes rest on the documents, seeing not only the words but the years they represented. Robert's hand guiding mine when we first drafted them. His insistence that dignity must be guarded as carefully as profit. He had been right. We do not cancel the wedding outright, I said. My voice was calm, clipped. We suspend under brand protection. Vendors remain bound but paused. The door is not locked. James nodded. Exactly. Suspension maintains leverage without burning contracts. They cannot claim damages. They cannot paint you vindictive. I reached for the addendum draft. It was a single sheet, plain, waiting for ink. The clause I had insisted on was printed clearly. Services may be reinstated upon formal apology to the trustee and public acknowledgement of her role as benefactor. Apology to be written, signed, and read aloud at reception. It was not about humiliation. It was about truth. I wanted them to own what they had tried to erase. Redemption was possible, but not free. I signed my name at the bottom. Steady strokes. D, then H, the way I had done 1,000 times before. The associates exchanged glances, not surprise, but respect. They saw I was not flinching. We'll circulate this addendum to vendors within the hour, James said. By tomorrow, every party connected to the event will understand the conditions. The family can choose acknowledgement or nothing. The pen clicked softly as I set it down. No raised voice, no lecture. Just paper, ink, signature. I leaned back in my chair and let silence hold the room. In my mind, I pictured Mason, Chloe, Patricia reading those lines. Perhaps anger first, then shame, then the slow recognition that doors close unless you knock properly. My son might feel torn, but he would also see his mother was not erased. She had drawn the boundary in legal ink. The vineyard beyond the glass stretched wide, rows stripped for winter, waiting. Power was not in shouting. Power was in contracts that told the truth when people refused to. The boardroom sits on the ridge above the valley, glass on 3 sides, oak table in the center. I arrived early and set 3 glasses of water in a neat line. No flowers. Mason and Chloe came together. They stood close but not touching. Patricia was not invited. I had been explicit about that in the email. This conversation needed no chorus. I gestured to the chairs. We sat. I kept my hands folded. They fidgeted. The room held the vineyard like a painting. A hawk circled outside. The air conditioner hummed for a full minute. I said nothing. Silence settled like a cloth over a wound. Thank you for meeting me, I began. I will be brief. You have 3 options. I slid 3 envelopes across the table, each labeled. Chloe glanced at Mason. He nodded for her to open them. She read, eyes moving quickly. He read over her shoulder. Option A, I said. Cancellation with refund as permitted under the contract. We release all dates and vendors. The matter ends. There is no venue, no suites, no chef. The deposit returns less administrative fees listed on page 2. You will need a new plan. Option B, I said, tapping the second envelope. A simple ceremony at a public restaurant of your choice. I will not interfere. I will not attend unless invited. I will contribute nothing, and I will demand nothing. It is yours to design on your budget. Option C, I said. The Vineyard as scheduled, with conditions a written apology signed by both of you. A public acknowledgement at the reception that I funded the event. A commitment that no vendor will receive conflicting instructions again. I will attend quietly. I will sit where you place me. I will not take the microphone. The point is recognition, not spectacle. No one spoke. The hawk drifted. The sun slid along the table edge. Mason cleared his throat, failed to speak, tried again. Chloe set the papers down and folded her hands. She said, "Mrs. Harris, I never meant to hurt you." Her voice wavered, then steadied. "I was afraid of looking small in front of my family," she swallowed. "I handled it poorly." It was the closest she had come to an apology. It was not one. I nodded once. Fear of smallness makes people do small things. I kept my tone neutral. "This is not punishment. It is correction." Mason leaned forward. "Mom, is the apology truly necessary? Could we acknowledge you privately and move on?" He looked tired. Rings under his eyes had deepened since the suspension. "It is necessary," he said. "You tried to write me out. The correction must be public to match the harm. The promise is simple. Tell the truth about who paid. Stop misrepresenting who decides." He stared at the glass of water. His finger traced a ring of condensation. "What if we choose option B? Then you have a wedding on your terms," I said, "and a marriage that begins without debt to me. Some people prefer that." I let the possibility breathe. I would accept it. "And if we choose A," Chloe's chin lifted. She wanted courage to look like control. "If you choose A," I said, "the refund processes within 10 business days. The vendors revert to available. The story ends. There is no shame in starting over." I slid a final sheet across the table, a single sentence with a date and a time. "Whichever path you choose, I require your signatures by Friday at 5. Past that, the suspension converts to cancellation under the brand protection clause." More silence. Real silence this time, not a tactic. Mason looked out at the vines. Chloe folded the envelopes into a stack as if order could make the decision lighter. He said very quietly, "I need time." "I have a lifetime," I answered. "But the contract has a deadline." We stood. They left with the envelopes. I stayed with the hawk and the hum in the valley below. The room felt brighter when the door clicked shut. Not because I had won, but because the terms were finally clear. What neither of them knew what I discovered through James's discreet investigation was that Patricia had been telling Chloe a very different story about me and my finances. She had convinced her daughter that I was living beyond my means, struggling to maintain the vineyard, and that my deposit was a desperate attempt to control Mason because I was financially dependent on him. The reality couldn't have been further from the truth. Patricia's own financial troubles had led her to project a false narrative. She had painted me as needy when she was the one drowning in debt. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I had kept quiet about my wealth to protect Mason from entitlement, Patricia had lied about my supposed poverty to control her daughter. Two mothers with opposing strategies, both believing they were protecting their children. The revolving door at the hotel lobby always made me pause. Glass curved in 4 panels, each slice reflecting back a different version of myself. Widow, mother, owner, outcast. That morning, I stepped in, the panels turning with a hush, my coat brushing the brass rail, light from the Napa sun scattered across the marble floor ahead. It felt like crossing a threshold again. Marcus waited near the reception desk, a clipboard tucked under his arm. He was 50 sharp in his dark suit, always steady. "Mrs. Harris," he said, lowering his voice. "I wanted to let you know what happened last night." He guided me aside, away from the flow of check-ins. "One of Chloe's relatives called, tried to pressure the front desk into reopening reservations. said you had no authority, that your suspension was personal. But the junior clerk, David, just 22, stood his ground. He pulled up the file, pointed to your trustee authority, and refused to override it. Marcus's smile was small but certain. He told them, Mrs. Harris signs every page. If you want this changed, take it up with her directly. I felt the air shift. A young employee, someone who owed me nothing, had chosen to guard my name like it mattered. That was loyalty not purchased, but born. I nodded slowly. Thank him for me, I said. My voice was softer than I expected. Marcus tilted his head. He already asked to tell you himself. A few moments later, David appeared from the back office, nervous, thin-framed, tie slightly crooked. He held a small paper bag folded neat at the top. Mrs. Harris, he said, cheeks coloring. I hope this isn't too forward. He set the bag on the counter. Inside, I saw a box of loose tea from a local Napa shop, the kind Robert used to buy when we had barely enough money for wine, let alone hotels. I read an old blog post, David explained quickly. It was about you and Mr. Harris, the early days, how you used to brew tea from Vineyard herbs when you couldn't afford proper blends. How you called it your lucky ritual before meetings. His hands fidgeted. I thought you might like this. Just a way of saying we see you and we respect what you built. For a long breath, I didn't answer. The revolving door behind me turned, guests coming and going, each step echoing. I thought of that blog entry, one I had written for Robert years ago. Half diary, half letter. I hadn't known anyone still read it. The fact that a young clerk in my own hotel had and cared enough to bring me tea felt heavier than any contract I'd signed that week. I lifted the bag gently, as though it were glass. Thank you, I said. Just 2 words, but the boy's shoulders eased as if I'd absolved him of a weight. Marcus clasped my elbow lightly as anchor. This is what legacy looks like, he murmured. Not just contracts, not just vineyards, but the people who carry your story forward. I turned toward the revolving door again, tea bag in hand. I stepped inside, the panel shifting me back into the world outside. For a second, my reflection doubled, past and present. A widow with lines on her face, a girl who once poured tea in chipped mugs, a matriarch with a vineyard behind her name. As I emerged into sunlight, the air crisp on my cheeks, I smiled quietly, not because I had won yet, but because I realized I was not alone. My family, the one of paper and blood, might fracture, but another was forming seed by seed. The clerk, the manager, the workers who remembered Robert's notes and Sophia's words. Chosen, not given. The revolving door turned once more behind me. The storm did not arrive with thunder. It came through whispers dressed as certainty. Patricia began calling vendors, weaving her version of events. To her, I was not a widow who had kept a vineyard alive. I was a jealous mother who wanted the spotlight. She told Vanessa, the planner, that the real issue was my ego, not her daughter's choices. Then she pushed further. On the program, she insisted. Replace mother of the groom with an escort, just someone to walk him in. She doesn't belong there. The cruelty was casual, practiced. Patricia never raised her voice. She dripped poison like sugar, slow and sweet. I did not hear her live, but James forwarded me the recordings Vanessa had discreetly shared. Her tone was polite, rehearsed. For the vibe, she said, always that word. We must protect the couple's peace. That evening, my phone blinked with a voicemail. Mason's voice worn thin. Mom, we need peace. Please don't make this harder than it is. Chloe's upset. Patricia's under stress. Maybe just let this go. His words fractured at the edges like glass ready to crack. He did not ask about the truth. He asked for quiet. I sat at the kitchen table with the voicemail in my hand. The tea bag David had given me resting nearby. I did not call back. Silence was my only answer. Sometimes silence carries more weight than argument. The next morning, James sent a file through secure email. I opened it slowly. Inside was a transcript. Vanessa pressured to change the authorized contact on all contracts. Patricia had claimed to act with my consent, telling vendors that I was stepping aside for the good of the family. She wanted every communication redirected through her. It was clear, deliberate misrepresentation. James's note was brief. This is the evidence, objective, irrefutable. I read the lines twice, then a third time. The words were not angry. They were worse, they were efficient. Authorized contact to be updated to Patricia Bennett. The planner had pushed back gently, but Patricia had pressed harder. The bride's mother speaks for the family, she said. The trust documents lay open on my desk. The ink of my signature unshaken by rumor. Misrepresentation was not only an ethical breach, it was a legal one. Contracts exist for such storms. I let my hand rest on Robert's old mug, chipped and steady. I thought of Sophia's reminder. They wanted to erase a story. I thought of Mason's plea, peace at any cost, and I thought of Patricia's voice, calm and cruel, rewriting me out of my own son's life. I did not answer Mason. I did not answer Patricia. I did not even answer Vanessa. My silence was not surrender. It was the space between the strike and the echo. What I discovered later, through Sophia's network of Vineyard workers, was more than I expected. Patricia's family wasn't just struggling financially, their entire social position was built on debt and pretense. William Bennett, Patricia's husband, had been quietly selling assets to maintain appearances. They had 3 mortgages on their home, and their country club membership was months behind in dues. The wedding wasn't just a celebration, it was a desperate bid to maintain their facade of prosperity. They had told friends and family that the venue was a gift from a business associate of William's, never mentioning my deposit. My suspension had not only threatened the wedding, it had threatened to expose their financial house of cards. Patricia wasn't just fighting for her daughter's day. She was fighting to keep her own world from collapsing. Understanding this didn't excuse her actions, but it helped me see the desperation behind her cruelty. The boardroom sat high above the valley, windows cut wide to the vines rolling down the slope. I chose the same table as before, oak polished to a sheen. Chairs placed with deliberate care. This time, no empty seats. Mason and Chloe sat together, hands tight, eyes hollow. Patricia arrived with William trailing a step behind. Her pearl necklace clicked when she folded her arms. Eleanor slipped in quietly, face carved with worry. James stood at the end, folder under his arm, his presence calm but firm. I opened with no preamble. Thank you for coming. I will be brief. My voice carried across the glass and wood without effort. This is not about blame, it is about clarity. I slid a thin packet forward, 3 pages clipped. This is the term sheet. The Vineyard is willing to proceed under 3 conditions. I looked at Mason and Chloe directly. First, a handwritten letter of apology from both of you, signed before the ceremony. Second, a public acknowledgement during the reception of who funded the event. Third, a written commitment from both families that no defamatory statements about me or my role will be made to any vendor, guest, or press. Silence stretched. I did not feel it. Outside, a gust bent the vines in long waves. Patricia broke first. This is humiliation, she said, voice sharp. You want to drag my daughter in front of everyone, force her to admit weakness. Do you know what that will look like in our circle? How do you expect us to show our faces? Her words cracked into a tremor. You'll ruin us. I folded my hands. I am not taking anyone's face. Patricia, I am asking for my name back. Nothing more. Her husband reached for her arm, but she pulled away, tears smudging her careful eyeliner. Chloe shifted, biting her lip. Mason kept staring at the papers as though the words might rearrange into something easier. Eleanor finally spoke, quiet but firm. Patricia, no one is ruined by telling the truth. We all know who wrote the check, pretending otherwise. She stopped, then sighed. That's the shame. Patricia shook her head, whispering almost to herself. They'll laugh at us. I let the silence return, the room filling with the hum of the air system and the faint tick of James's pen against his folder. Then I leaned slightly forward. Patricia, people already laugh at families who take money and erase the giver. at brides who uninvite their grooms' mothers while sleeping in suites built by her company. The laughter is already here. What I am offering is dignity, a chance to correct the story before it spreads further. Mason finally raised his eyes. He looked not at me, but at Chloe. "We should sign," he said, voice barely audible. "It's the right thing." Chloe swallowed, tears trembling at the corners of her lashes. "I never wanted it to be like this." "Then let it be otherwise," I said. 3 conditions, nothing hidden, nothing cruel, just the truth written and spoken. Patricia collapsed into her chair, shoulders shaking, her protest drowned in her own sobs. I did not gloat. I did not move. I simply repeated softly, "I am not taking face. I am asking for a name." James laid 2 pens on the table, one before Mason, one before Chloe. The papers waited. The vines outside swayed, patient, as if they knew that truth, like harvest, always comes in season. What I couldn't have predicted was William's next move. As Patricia wept, he straightened his shoulders and spoke for the first time. "My wife," he said slowly, "has been trying to protect something we lost months ago. The truth is, we can't afford this wedding. We never could." The room went still. Patricia's sobs turned silent, her face a mask of shock and betrayal. "Our investments failed last year," William continued. "We've been living on credit. Patricia was terrified our friends would find out, that Chloe would be humiliated." He looked at me directly. "It doesn't excuse what we did to you, Mrs. Harris, but it explains it." Mason's expression shifted from confusion to understanding. Chloe reached for her father's hand, her eyes filled with a daughter's pain seeing her parents' vulnerability. I had not expected this confession. It changed nothing about my terms, but it changed something in the room's atmosphere. The truth had a way of clearing space, of letting air move again where it had been trapped. "Thank you for your honesty, William," I said simply. "It matters." Patricia stared at her husband as if he'd betrayed her utterly. In her world, the appearance of wealth was more important than its reality, but something in Chloe's face relief, perhaps suggested that the daughter might be ready for a different kind of truth than her mother had taught her. Mason picked up his pen first. Chloe followed. They signed all 3 copies, one after another, the scratch of pen on paper the only sound. When they were done, I nodded once. "The suspension lifts immediately. Vendors will be notified within the hour. The wedding proceeds." We all stood. The meeting concluded without fanfare. As they filed out, Mason hung back, waiting until the others had left. "Mom," he said, voice low, "I didn't know about the Bennett's finances. I didn't know a lot of things. I just wanted everyone to be happy. Happiness built on erasure isn't happiness. Mason, it's theater." He nodded, eyes on the floor. "I'm going to read something at the wedding. A thank you. Not because the contract says so, because it's true." I touched his sleeve lightly. "Make it yours, not mine, not Patricia's. Yours." He left, shoulders straighter than when he'd arrived. I stayed in the room alone, watching the valley stretch below, thinking of all the words that had just been spoken after so many years of careful silence. Sometimes truth costs more than we want to pay, but its absence costs even more. I came home to quiet, the kind of quiet that pressed against the walls, heavy and close. The chair at the end of the table, Robert's chair, sat empty, its wood worn smooth by years of his steady hands. I rested my bag down and let myself sink into the silence. My bones ached from holding composure all day. The kettle hissed, then clicked off. I poured water into the chipped Napa cup, the one with the faint crack Robert had once defended. "Don't throw it out. A crack just proves it's been used." I sat staring at the faint line, steam curling into the air. There was a knock, soft, hesitant. Eleanor stepped in, hair pulled back, eyes swollen as if she had not slept. She carried nothing but a folded handkerchief. She did not sit until I gestured. She spoke quickly, words tumbling. "Donna, there's something I never told you. Years ago, When Alan lost his job and we were about to lose the house, I begged you to co-sign that loan. No one else knew. You stood in that bank with me, signed your name, took the debt. We kept the roof. We kept our dignity. I never said it out loud until now. I remembered the afternoon in the cramped bank office, the pen heavy in my hand, Eleanor's face pale and desperate. I had carried that burden quietly, never asking repayment, never bringing it up in arguments. I let it slip into the silence of all the other sacrifices. Eleanor's voice broke. I told myself I'd make it up to you, but instead I sat by while Patricia twisted the story, while Mason stayed silent. I let them erase you, the very person who once saved me. She covered her eyes, shoulders trembling. I did not speak. I let the silence do its work. When she finally lowered her hands, she placed something small in my palm. A button, pearl gray, edges dulled with years. It's from Robert's wedding suit. He wore it that day, and I kept it after the jacket fell apart. I should have given it to you long ago. The button sat against my skin. Cool, familiar. I set it next to the cracked cup. The two objects side by side, one that held tea, one that once held a vow, both scarred, both still holding. Eleanor whispered, "You deserved better than our silence." I looked at the button, then at her. My voice was quiet. We all deserved better. She wept openly then, tears darkening the handkerchief. I did not move to comfort her. I simply kept the button close, the weight of an unspoken truth now spoken at last. The next day, Vanessa reported that all vendors had been notified, all contracts reactivated. The wedding was back on course, though smaller than originally planned, 40 guests instead of 100, one-string quartet instead of a band, roses from our own garden instead of imported blooms. The envelope arrived by hand. Chloe's handwriting wavered across the front. Letters uneven, as if each stroke argued with itself. Inside, on plain cream paper. The apology trembled in ink. "Mrs. Harris, I was wrong. I let fear speak louder than gratitude. I let my mother's pride drown out my own heart. Please forgive me. Please allow me to honor you properly." The words were not polished. They did not try to be clever. They were human, shaky, and in their imperfection, they carried weight. I set the letter beside Robert's cracked cup and the button Eleanor had given me. Objects in a row, scarred, ordinary, enduring. Vanessa called that afternoon, voice softer than I had ever heard. "Mrs. Harris, I've redone the schedule. The guest count is now 40. We've cut the excess, kept the essentials. No spotlight, no grandeur, just vows, music, and supper. Will you review?" I listened to her list. Smaller hall, trimmed flowers, one-string quartet instead of a band. She had stripped away the show and left something bare, almost tender. Chef Laurent came next. "Madam Harris, I added a soup, simple onion, the kind your husband liked. I thought it belonged." His tone was gentle, without presumption. I pictured Robert at our kitchen table, spoon in hand, steam on his glasses, a wedding menu touched by his memory, quiet, unadvertised, but present. I nodded, though Laurent could not see. When Mason stopped by to confirm the changes, I told him my seat. "Not the front row," they said. "Put me in the middle among the people, not behind a dais, not beside a spotlight. A mother watching her son. Nothing more." He looked surprised, then relieved. "You're sure?" "I am sure," I said. "That is the dignity I want." The Vineyard calendar turned its page. Rose greened, air warmed. The wedding would not be what they first imagined. It would be smaller, humbler, but perhaps for the first time. True. What surprised me most in those days of preparation was Mason's transformation. He came by the Vineyard in the early mornings, walking the rows with Sophia, asking questions about pruning that he hadn't shown interest in since childhood. He spent hours in the barrel room with Laurent, learning the blends his father had created. It was as if the confrontation had freed something in him, not just the obligation to stand up for me, but curiosity about his heritage, the land and work that had shaped his life without him fully realizing it. One evening, I found him in Robert's office, poring over the old ledgers. "Did you know Dad named each section of the vineyard?" he asked without looking up. "This one was called Mason's First Steps. This one, Donna's Patience." They weren't just fields to him. "No," I said softly. "They never were." He closed the book carefully. "I've spent so many years trying to build my own identity away from here. I never realized how much of me was already written in this soil." It wasn't an apology, exactly, but it was an acknowledgement of roots, of connection, of seeing clearly what had always been there. Meanwhile, Chloe had her own reckoning. The revelation of her parents' financial struggles had shaken her world. She had been raised to believe that appearance was everything, that social standing required perfect presentation at all costs. Now she was facing a wedding stripped of excess, where truth rather than show would be the centerpiece. She came to the vineyard alone one afternoon, asking to see the rose garden where the ceremony would be held. I walked with her in silence, letting her take in the simple beauty of the place without embellishment. "My mother always told me that wealth means never having to admit need," she said finally, "that successful people never show vulnerability. But you built all this starting with nothing, didn't you?" "We did," I said. "Robert and I, we failed often. We asked for help. We showed every vulnerability there is." She nodded slowly. "I think I was afraid of you because you represent something my mother taught me to fear: a woman who doesn't need validation from others to know her worth." The wind moved through the roses, carrying their scent between us. I didn't answer. Some realizations need space to settle. "I'd like to learn," she said finally. "Not just about wine or business, about standing in truth even when it isn't pretty." I looked at this young woman, so different from me, raised with such different values, yet standing here asking for something real. "That," I said, "I can teach." The day before the wedding, Patricia came alone. I had not expected her. She stood at my door, perfectly composed as always, pearl earrings catching the light. But something in her eyes had changed, not softened exactly, but clarified, like wine after decanting. "I won't apologize," she said as soon as I opened the door. "I did what I thought was necessary to protect my daughter." "I know," I said, "but I was wrong about you." The words seemed to cost her physical effort. "I thought you were like the other women in our circle, using money as a leash, children as trophies. I've spent my life navigating those waters." She looked past me into the house, not meeting my eyes. "William tells me you could have destroyed us legally, that you had grounds for more than just suspension." I waited. "Thank you for not doing that," she said finally. "For my daughter's sake. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't even true reconciliation. But it was recognition one mother to another of the lines we draw to protect what we love, and the costs when those lines cut too deep." "Would you like tea?" I asked. She hesitated, then nodded once. We sat at my kitchen table, the cracked cup between us, and spoke carefully of weather and flowers and the next day's forecast. Some bridges take more than one conversation to build, but at least we had stopped trying to burn this one down. The valley glowed like a bowl of honey. Evening light streamed across the rows of vines, each leaf holding a drop of gold. Guests gathered beneath the arbor, 40 chairs set in careful lines, not too close, not too far. The air carried the sound of strings and the faint perfume of roses tucked into jars on each table. I sat midway down the aisle, the place I had chosen, not hidden, not exalted, just present. A mother among witnesses, Eleanor at my side, Sophia 2 rows back, Marcus and Laurent standing near the service tables like guardians in plain clothes. Mason and Chloe stood at the altar, their hands shaking, but not from fear. The officiant lifted the book, spoke words about love as patience, about vows as promises that bend but do not break. Before the rings, Mason asked for the microphone. His voice wavered at first, then found its steadiness. "Before Chloe and I pledge our vows, There is someone we must honor. None of us would be here without her. She gave more than money. She gave the labor of her hands, the strength of her silence, the patience of her love, for years. I forgot to say it. Tonight, I will thank you. Mom. He turned, eyes meeting mine. They did not beg, did not excuse. They acknowledged. That was enough. Applause rose, not forced, but warm. I let it wash over without lifting my hand. Then Chloe stepped forward. She held the mic close. I wronged you, she said, voice plain, eyes wet. I listened to fear instead of respect. I asked you not to come, yet you came anyway, and you gave me more than I deserved. Thank you for teaching me what grace looks like. Her words were brief, but they were hers, not Patricia's, not scripted. I believed her. That too was enough. The officiant cleared his throat, returned to the vows. Rings were exchanged. Lips met. The valley cheered softly. Later at the tables, candles flickered in jars. I placed Robert's cracked cup before me, poured a small stream of the new white vintage we had bottled only weeks ago. Pale gold filled the fracture lines. Still, the cup held steady. Vessels crack, I said quietly to the woman seated beside me. But they can still carry water. My own echo line. Returning home. The cameras recording the day caught the silence that followed. 2 beats of stillness stretched wide enough for breath, for truth, for memory. I noticed Patricia watching from across the room, her face a careful mask. But when our eyes met, she raised her glass slightly. Not in friendship, perhaps, but in recognition. We had both fought for our children in our own ways. We had both been wrong and right in turns. As the evening deepened, Mason led Chloe to the dance floor. They moved together like water finding its level, 2 people beginning to understand the geography of their shared life. I watched them from the edge of the light, remembering another wedding, another dance. Robert's hand warm against my back. Sophia appeared beside me, a glass of our oldest red in her hand. The young ones look like they might get it right, she said. They might, I agreed. They're starting with truth, at least. Truth and good wine, she added. Not a bad foundation. We clinked glasses softly. 2 widows watching life continue its stubborn, beautiful cycle. The vines would be pruned, would bud, would bear fruit. Harvests would come and go. Seasons would turn. And all of it would happen whether we spoke or stayed silent. But the silence, I had learned, was a choice. And it was mine to wield or release as wisdom dictated. When the night ended, Mason and Chloe left for their honeymoon, not the extravagant European tour originally planned, but a week in a cabin at the edge of our property, where they could wake to vineyard mornings and learn the rhythms of the land that would someday be theirs. I watched their car disappear down the gravel lane, taillights fading into darkness. Then I turned back to the empty reception hall, where staff were quietly clearing tables, folding chairs, restoring order. I picked up Robert's cup, now empty but for a thin ring of wine at the bottom, evidence of what it had held. The crack caught the light, a silver line mapping an old injury, still visible but no longer threatening the cup's purpose. I carried it carefully home, where it would sit on my shelf beside Eleanor's button, Chloe's letter, and all the other small tokens of a life built on holding things that matter, even when they're imperfect. I did not move houses. I did not sell off the vineyard or announce a dramatic break. Severance, when it came, was quieter than people expected. I signed new papers with James, revoked the old power of attorney, drew a clean line around my finances. No more blurred access. No more signatures in someone else's pocket. The trust was settled next. A portion of the vineyard's profits would fund a scholarship in Robert's name, one for children of field workers, another in Sophia's. She had bent her back in the rows long before the land bore fruit. It was time her name bore something permanent. I felt no anger as I signed, just steadiness. Paperwork can be vengeance, but it can also be protection. Weeks later, Marcus asked me to speak at a training for new hires at the hotel. 10 minutes. Mrs. Harris, tell them why names matter here. So I stood before a dozen fresh uniforms. I told them about a vineyard once called worthless, about a cup once cracked, about a woman once asked not to attend her own son's wedding. Names carry history, I said, and respect is the soil that lets people grow. They nodded. Some scribbled notes. One girl wiped her eyes. Afterward, Laurent brought out bowls of soup, the same onion broth Robert loved. Sophia sat with us under the arbor, hands folded over the notebook of harvests she still kept. Marcus poured glasses, toasting not profit, but patience. Around that table, laughter rose, younger voices mixing with older ones. None of them shared my blood, yet they carried me more surely than family had in years. A chosen family formed not by duty, but by recognition. The vines outside stirred in the evening wind, leaves rustling like applause. I thought, this is what survival looks like. Not severing with noise, but building with care. The changes in Mason and Chloe were gradual but unmistakable. They visited the vineyard regularly, not out of obligation but genuine interest. Mason began shadowing Sophia during harvest, learning the decisions his father had made decades ago. Chloe, to everyone's surprise, showed an unexpected talent for marketing. She redesigned our tasting room brochures, bringing a fresh aesthetic while honoring the vineyard's history. They were finding their place in the story without erasing what came before. It wasn't perfect, there were still tensions, still moments when old patterns threatened to resurface, but there was effort and honesty, and those were foundations we could build on. Patricia remained Patricia proud, status conscious, careful with her image. But something had shifted between us. We would never be friends, but we had reached a truce based on mutual respect for boundaries. She had seen that I could not be erased or intimidated, and in that recognition came a grudging regard. William, freed from the burden of pretense, seemed to grow younger. He started helping with the vineyard's finances, bringing his banking experience to our operations. It gave him purpose and restored some of his dignity after the exposure of their financial troubles. Eleanor and I grew closer than we had been in years. The button from Robert's suit sat on my desk, a reminder of what happens when we hold our truths too long in silence. We began having Sunday dinners together, sometimes joined by Mason and Chloe, sometimes just the two of us, rebuilding the sisterhood that had sustained us through those early, struggling years. As for me, I found myself speaking more often, not just about the vineyard, but about the lessons of those weeks before the wedding, about dignity, about boundaries, about the difference between peace and erasure. I spoke at women's business events, at widow support groups, at family counseling centers. I told them about a text message that tried to delete a mother, about contracts that protected more than money, about a cup that held despite its cracks. I wrote a new letter tonight, not to Mason, but to the woman I will be in 10 years, and to any mother staring at a phone that will not ring. I dated it in blue ink, folded the page once, and began with what I wish someone had told me when the first crack appeared in the cup. This is not a letter about winning. It is a letter about standing, about the quiet you choose, not the silence forced upon you, about remembering that a life is not a guest list. It is a threshold you are allowed to cross. Today, dear future me, and dear you who are listening, if you are waiting for an invitation, you can stop waiting. The door to your own life is already unlocked. You do not have to earn your seat by being smaller, softer, or silent. Be kind and keep your name. Love people and still say no to erasure. Hold boundaries without raising your voice. Lift standards without shaming anyone. When fear says keep the peace, ask peace for whom. Choose the quiet that protects dignity, not the quiet that hides harm. If respect is missing, bring it. If it will not arrive, withdraw your gift and keep your worth. Call things by their names, then keep moving. When I paused the wedding, I did not punish anyone. I corrected the story. Paper can feel cold, but sometimes it is the clean bandage a wound requires. I thanked Sophia for the ledger that keeps our seasons honest, Marcus for the steadiness that guards the door, Laurent for the soup that remembers Robert, and the young clerk who brought tea when the room felt cold. I told myself to remember Mason at dawn standing in frost, choosing truth, even when it costs comfort. I promise to keep a chair open for him and for Chloe as long as respect sits in it first. That is the shape of peace I can live with. It is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of honesty. If the cup cracks again, and it will, carry it with 2 hands. Speak less. Write more. Hold fast. Put your name where it belongs. If you feel yourself shrinking, step into the light and stand still until your breath returns. If you feel alone, reach for the people who have proven themselves steady. Chosen family grows like vines, one trellis at a time. I signed the letter and read it aloud in the kitchen. The house listened. Then I folded it and slid it under the Napa cup. Paper under porcelain. Story under symbol. I left it there like a small anchor. Enough weight to remind me that wholeness is not perfection. It is the courage to be held together. Before we say goodbye, I would love to know where you are watching from. Is it a quiet morning with coffee or a late night where stories keep you company? Let us know in the comments. I read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to join a community that believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Wherever you are, carry this story with you and remember this truth. Sometimes the miracle does not knock. It waits quietly for you to open your heart. The month after the wedding brought change to the valley, not the dramatic shifting of seasons, but the subtle realignment that happens when truth finds its place. Mason and Chloe returned from their honeymoon with sunburned noses and quieter voices. They moved into a cottage on the east edge of the property, close enough to visit but far enough to build their own rhythm. I watched them from my kitchen window some mornings, walking the rows before the heat rose, heads bent in conversation. Once, I saw Mason point to the southern hill where he had played as a child. Chloe listened, her hand in his, learning the geography of his past. It was a small thing, but tender him sharing roots he had once been eager to escape. The first Monday they were back, Mason appeared at my office door, a folder in his hand. He knocked through the door stood open. Old habits of formality, of careful distance. "Mom, I want to understand the business," he said, stepping inside. "Not just the vines and the hotel, the contracts, the finances, the legal structure. Everything you and Dad built." I set down my pen. "Why now?" "Because I should have asked years ago." He placed the folder on my desk. Inside were pages of notes he'd taken, questions about cash flow, trust allocations, water rights. "I've been taking what you created for granted, not seeing the work. I want to learn." There was no way to hide my surprise. Mason had always treated the vineyard as background noise to his life, something that existed but required no attention. Now he was asking to see the engine beneath the hood. "It won't be simple," I said. "Your father and I spent decades building these systems. I have time." His voice was steady. "And I have you to teach me." So began our Tuesday meetings. Each week, we sat in the conference room where I had once presented him with 3 envelopes. Now we spread balance sheets and operational flowcharts across the same oak table. I taught him how the barrels were financed, how the hotel maintenance was scheduled, how the staff health insurance was structured, the invisible architecture of care that held up the visible beauty. He absorbed it all with surprising aptitude, asking questions that showed he was thinking not just about profit, but about people. "These vineyard workers," he said one day, pointing to a payroll sheet. "They make less than the hotel staff. Is that fair?" "No," I answered honestly. "It's a problem in the industry. Your father and I tried to offset it with better housing, health benefits, education stipends for their children. But the wage gap remains. It's something I hope to see change in my lifetime." He made a note. "Then it's something we should work on." The word hung in the air between us, small but weighty, a bridge being built plank by plank. Chloe found her own path into the family business, though not in ways anyone expected. One afternoon, she appeared at the tasting room door with a portfolio under her arm. "I'd like to show you something," she said. "If you have time." Time, that most precious currency. I nodded and cleared my desk. She spread out her designs not just for new wine labels, but for a complete renovation of our visitor experience. Virtual tours for those who couldn't travel, wine education classes taught by Sophia, history exhibits featuring Robert's journals and our early struggles. The Vineyard isn't just about wine, she explained, fingers tracing her sketches. It's about story, your story, and stories are what I know. I studied her work, impressed by her eye for detail and her respect for authenticity. There was nothing pretentious in her designs, nothing that erased or diminished the labor behind the beauty. She had captured the essence of what Robert and I had built, not luxury, but care made visible. You understand, I said simply. She looked up, surprised. What, the point of it all, not to impress, but to honor, not to seem, but to be. Color touched her cheeks. I'm learning, she said. From you, another bridge, another plank. The space between us narrowing. Patricia's transformation was slower, more cautious. Her pride had been deeply wounded by William's public admission of their financial troubles. For weeks after the wedding, she withdrew from social circles, canceled her country club appearances, sent regrets to charity luncheons. She was, as Sophia put it, licking her wounds in private, but on a rainy Thursday in April, her silver Mercedes appeared in my driveway. She sat there for several minutes before getting out, as if gathering courage. When she finally knocked, her eyes were clear, her posture straight as ever. "May I come in?" she asked. No preamble, no social niceties. I stepped aside to let her enter. She glanced around my kitchen, the simple pine table, the herbs drying above the sink, the row of preserves from last summer's garden. Nothing grand, nothing showy, yet the warmth was undeniable. "I've been thinking," she said, still standing, "about what you said at the boardroom, about dignity not coming from silencing others." I waited, giving her space to find her words. "I've spent my life cultivating an image," she continued. "The perfect home, the perfect family, the perfect social standing. I thought I was protecting Chloe, giving her advantages I never had. But I was teaching her to fear authenticity." She finally sat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "William and I are selling our house. We're downsizing to something we can actually afford. It's humbling, but also freeing." I poured 2 cups of tea, using everyday mugs, not the cracked Napa cup. Some symbols belong to private ceremonies. "Freedom often comes through humbling," I sassy said, sliding a mug toward her. She accepted it with a small nod. "Chloe seems happier, here with you all, learning the business. I expected her to resent the simpler wedding, the change in our circumstances. Instead, she's flourishing. Perhaps because there's room to be imperfect here," I suggested. "To learn without pretending to already know." Patricia sipped her tea, considering this. "I'm not sure I know how to live without pretense," she admitted. "It's been my armor for so long." "Armor is heavy," I says. "It weighs more the longer you wear it." She studied me over the rim of her mug, really seeing me perhaps for the first time. "How did you do it? Build all this without becoming hard or bitter." I thought of Robert, of Sophia, of Eleanor, of all the hands that had held mine when the weight seemed too much. "I didn't do it alone," I said simply. "And I didn't do it perfectly. I made my own mistakes. Keeping Mason in the dark about our success, hiding behind silence when I should have spoken. We all have our armors. Patricia. The question is whether we're willing to set them down." She didn't answer directly, but before she left, she said something that stayed with me. "I've spent my life afraid of women like you, strong women who don't need approval. I thought you were the enemy. Now I wonder if you're the mirror I've been avoiding." It wasn't friendship, not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was recognition. And sometimes. That's where healing begins. Summer came early that year, heat ripening the grapes faster than expected. Sophia warned we might need to harvest in August rather than September. "The sugar's climbing," she reported. "We wait too long. We'll have syrup, not wine." I called an emergency staff meeting. Mason attended. Not as my son, but as an apprentice vintner learning the business. Chloe came too, her design portfolio replaced by a notebook filled with marketing strategies for an early release vintage. We'll need to hire additional pickers, Sophia explained. 20 more at least, and the cooling system in the crush pad needs upgrading to handle the heat. I looked at the budget projections. The cost was significant, but necessary. Quality couldn't be sacrificed for convenience. Approved, I said. Mason, work with Sophia on the hiring. Chloe, coordinate with marketing about messaging the early harvest. We'll frame it as an exclusive vintage, limited by nature's timeline. They nodded, already making notes. No hesitation, no questioning my authority, just collaborative focus on the work ahead. I felt a strange sense of rightness in that moment, not just as the vineyard owner, but as the head of a family finding its new formation. The next weeks were a blur of preparation, equipment serviced, barrels readied, temporary housing arranged for seasonal workers. Mason threw himself into the physical labor, working alongside the field crew, learning every step of the process from ground level. He came home sunburned and exhausted each night, but there was a new ease in his movements, a confidence that came from useful fatigue. Chloe surprised everyone by joining the night processing crew. I can't learn the business from behind a desk, she explained. I need to feel how it works, smell it, touch it. So she did, sorting grapes until her fingers were stained purple, learning to recognize the subtle differences between blocks and varietals. The crew adopted her quickly, teaching her their songs, sharing lunches, showing her shortcuts that no manual could capture. I watched from a distance, letting them find their way without my shadow. This was their initiation, their chance to earn respect not through inheritance but through sweat. William, unexpectedly, proved invaluable during the financial planning. His banking background gave him insight into cash flow management during the harvest rush. You should restructure your seasonal labor costs, he advised. There are tax advantages if you allocate them differently. He worked from a small desk in the accounting office, his Brooks Brothers suits replaced by khakis and button-downs. His arrogance softened into focused competence. He seemed relieved to be useful rather than impressive. Even Patricia found her place. She organized housing for the workers' families, arranging childcare, healthcare visits, even English classes in the evenings. These people are the foundation, she said when I expressed surprise at her involvement. If they're not supported, nothing else stands. It was an echo of something Robert used to say. I wondered if she had heard it from Mason or discovered it herself through observation. Either way, it showed a shift in her understanding of what truly made the vineyard successful. The harvest began on August 15th, 2 weeks earlier than normal. Dawn found us all in the fields, headlamps illuminating the vines as we raced to bring in the fruit before the day's heat could damage it. The air filled with the sweet, sharp scent of fresh-cut stems, the rhythmic snip of shears, the rustle of leaves being parted by practiced hands. I worked alongside everyone else, my back protesting but my spirit lifted by the communal effort. This was always my favorite time when theory became practice, when planning met reality, when the year's work culminated in tangible bounty. By noon, the first trucks were heading to the crush pad. By evening, the first juice was flowing, pale gold for the whites, deep ruby for the reds. Sophia tasted each batch, making notes, adjusting protocols. Mason shadowed her, learning to recognize the subtle signals that would determine the wine's final character. Your father had this gift, Sophia told him. He could taste the future in the present, the wine it would become, not just the juice it was. I saw Mason straighten at these words, pride and responsibility settling on his shoulders. He had spent so long trying to escape Robert's legacy. Now he was learning to carry it forward in his own way. The days blurred together, each one a repetition of the last pre-dawn rising, fieldwork, processing, evening planning for the next day's sectors. But within that rhythm, something beautiful was happening. The family was finding its collective purpose, each person contributing their strengths to the whole. Midway through the harvest, during a rare quiet moment, Eleanor joined me on the crush pad observation deck. We watched the activity below in companionable silence, sipping water from thermoses, too tired for unnecessary words. "They look like they belong," she said finally, nodding toward Mason and Chloe working side by side at the sorting table. "They do," I agreed. "Robert would be proud," she added softly. "Not just of the vineyard, of you, how you handled everything." I thought of the suspension order, the boardroom confrontation, the terms I had insisted upon. "I wasn't always kind," I admitted. "Kindness isn't always soft," Eleanor replied. "Sometimes it's a boundary firmly held. Sometimes it's a truth that won't bend." Below us, Mason looked up, catching my eye. He raised his hand in a small salute, purple-stained fingers against the white of his shirt. I returned the gesture, feeling a current of understanding pass between us. Not perfect understanding, not complete, but genuine. A beginning. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone in the barrel room, surrounded by the new vintage slowly taking shape in oak. The space smelled of fermentation and possibility, of transformation underway. I placed my hand against the curved wood of the nearest barrel, feeling the subtle warmth of chemical change happening inside. This was what Robert and I had built, not just a business, but a living system that converted struggle into beauty, labor into legacy. The early harvest would be remembered as one of our finest, the heat creating concentration and character that normal years couldn't match. Adversity becoming advantage, challenge becoming opportunity. It struck me then that the same was true of the wedding crisis. What had begun as rejection had become renewal. What had threatened to break us had instead revealed our strength. The suspension that Patricia had feared would ruin them had instead freed them from pretense. The confrontation Mason had tried to avoid had connected him to his heritage. I hadn't planned any of it. I had simply held fast to dignity, to truth, to the value of my place in the story. Everything else had followed from that single necessary stand. I wrote in the Harvest Journal that night, continuing the tradition Robert had started. August 20th, early harvest proceeding well. Heat stress minimal due to night picking, first fermentations showing excellent balance. Mason developing good instincts for timing. Chloe surprising everyone with her willingness to learn from ground up. The Bennett family finding new footing. Yield estimated 15% above projection despite accelerated schedule. Note to self: vessels under pressure reveal their true strength. This applies to barrels, families, and hearts. Hold fast. September brought cooler temperatures and the completion of harvest. The vineyard settled into post-production quiet, the vines beginning to yellow at the edges, preparing for their winter sleep. The tasting room reopened after its harvest closure, now featuring Chloe's redesigned experience program. Visitors moved through the space with new appreciation, learning not just about wine, but about the hands and histories that created it. One crisp morning, I found Mason waiting on my porch, a folder tucked under his arm. The early light caught the red in his hair, Robert's legacy written in genetics as surely as in land. "I have something to show you," he said. "Can we walk?" We followed the path down to the oldest section of the vineyard, the block Robert and I had planted our first year. The vines here were gnarled and wise, their roots reaching deep into soil that had once been considered worthless. Mason stopped at the end of a row, kneeling to touch the base of a particularly ancient plant. "Dad carved our initials here," he said. "Did you know our 8+D, and below it, May H?" He traced the faded letters with his finger. "I found it when I was 10. Never told you." I knelt beside him, feeling the roughened bark beneath my palm. "He wanted to mark our place," I said, to remind himself why he was working so hard. Mason nodded, then opened the folder. Inside were architectural drawings. "Chloe and I have been talking about the future, about our place here." He spread the plans on the ground between us. They showed a modest structure built into the hillside overlooking the original block, partially subterranean, with living roof and solar arrays. Large windows facing the valley, but otherwise unobtrusive. "We want to build here," he said. "Not a mansion, not a statement, just a home where we can raise a family connected to the land, where our children can know their heritage from the beginning." I studied the plans, noting the careful integration with the landscape, the respect for the vineyard's working nature. This wasn't a vanity project or a status symbol. It was a commitment to continuity, to stewardship. "What about your job in the city?" I asked. Mason had built a successful career in financial technology, commuting to San Francisco 3 days a week. "I'm negotiating remote work," he said. 3 days here, 2 days there. Eventually. "I'd like to transition fully to the vineyard. Not to take over," he added quickly, "but to contribute. To learn from you as long as you're willing to teach." I felt something shift inside me, a tension I hadn't fully acknowledged until it released. For years, I had carried the vineyard alone, uncertain of its future after me. I had never pressured Mason to return, believing his path was his to choose. Now he was choosing it freely, not from obligation, but from genuine desire. "The land would welcome you," I said simply. "As would I." His smile brightened, relief evident in the softening of his shoulders. "There's more," he said, turning to the next page. Chloe's proposal for expanding the education program. The plans outlined a teaching facility where visitors and local students could learn viticulture, winemaking, sustainable agriculture, classes taught by Sophia, by Laurent, by the master gardeners and mechanics and business people who kept the vineyard thriving, a formal sharing of knowledge that had previously passed only through apprenticeship. "She believes the future of luxury isn't exclusivity," Mason explained. "It's meaning, connection, understanding the value of things because you understand the work behind them." I thought of Patricia's obsession with appearances, with the right image regardless of substance. How different her daughter's vision was: depth over surface, authenticity over impression. "Your father would approve," I said. "He always said wine should tell a story you can taste." "Will you?" Mason asked, his question direct, vulnerable. I considered the investment required, the disruption to our operations, the risk of changing a successful model. But I also saw the potential not just for the business, but for the legacy, for what would remain after I was gone. "Yes," I said, "with one condition." He waited, attentive. "We named the teaching center after Sophia. While she's still here to see it, too many tributes come after people are gone." His face brightened. "She'll protest." "Let her," I said, smiling side. "Some honors should be accepted, even when they make us uncomfortable." We gathered the plans and walked back toward the house, the morning light strengthening around us. At the porch steps, Mason paused. "Mom," he said, his voice suddenly serious. "I need to tell you something. I've known about the vineyard's value since I was 16. I found the appraisal papers in Dad's office after he died. I saw the numbers, the projections, everything." I stared at him, processing this revelation. "All this time you knew." He nodded, looking slightly ashamed. "I didn't say anything because I thought that's what you wanted. To be treated normally, not like a wealthy CEO. To be Mom, not Mrs. Harris, vineyard owner." "Why tell me now?" I asked. "Because I realize it created a false distance between us. I was pretending not to know something fundamental about your life, about who you are and what you've accomplished. I thought I was respecting your privacy, but really, I was avoiding seeing you fully." I considered his words, feeling their weight. All these years, I had kept my success quiet to protect him from entitlement, while he had pretended ignorance to protect me from discomfort, both of us hiding parts of ourselves, thinking it was for the other's benefit. "We've been careful with each other," I said finally. "Perhaps too careful." "I'd like to stop," he said. "The pretending. I'd like to know you, all of you, the businesswoman as well as the mother, the widow as well as the CEO, the whole story, not just the parts that fit neatly into Mom." I felt tears threaten, unexpected and unwelcome. I blinked them back, but not before Mason noticed. He reached out, his hand covering mine briefly. "It's not too late," he said, "for us to start again. With truth this time." In that moment, I saw not just my son, but the man he had become. Thoughtful, direct, capable of growth, strong enough to admit mistakes and brave enough to begin again. Robert would have been so proud. No, I agreed. It's not too late at all. That evening, I invited them all to dinner, Mason and Chloe, Eleanor, Sophia, even Patricia and William. The long table in my dining room filled with voices and laughter, the awkwardness of our history gradually softening as wine flowed and stories were shared. Laurent had prepared Robert's favorite meal, herb-roasted lamb, roasted vegetables from our garden, and the simple onion soup that had become our tradition. I set the table with everyday dishes, saving the good china for less important occasions. This night called for comfort, not formality. After dessert, I brought out a special bottle, the first vintage Robert and I had produced that had won recognition. Only a few remained, kept for significant moments. I poured a small amount into each glass, including the cracked Napa cup at my place. A toast, I said, lifting my cup carefully. To new beginnings built on honest foundations, to family both born and chosen, and to Robert, who taught us all that broken ground can yield the finest fruit. Glasses clinked gently. Patricia's eyes met mine across the table, a moment of genuine connection passing between us. Eleanor squeezed my free hand. Sophia nodded, a guardian of memories approving this new chapter. Mason stood, his glass raised. And to my mother, he added, who taught us that dignity isn't what others give you, it's what you refuse to surrender. Who showed us that silence can be strength and boundaries can be love. To Donna, they echoed, voices blending. I sipped from the cracked cup, the aged wine still vibrant with acidity and depth. Some things improved with time, some breaks healed stronger than before, some stories needed to crack open before they could fully be told. The evening stretched long, no one eager to leave. When they finally departed, hugs replaced the formal goodbyes of previous gatherings. Even Patricia embraced me briefly, whispering, "Thank you for making room at your table." After everyone had gone, I stood on the porch watching the lights of Mason and Chloe's car wind down the drive toward their temporary cottage. Soon they would break ground on their hillside home. Soon a new generation would learn to walk among these vines. The story continuing, evolving, yet remaining essentially true to its roots. I thought of the text message that had started it all. For the vibe, please don't come. How close we had come to a permanent fracture. How easily silence could have hardened into absence. Absence into loss. Instead, here we were imperfect but intact, learning to speak our truths, to hear each other's needs, to hold space for both boundary and belonging. Not because I had won a power struggle, but because I had refused to disappear, because I had held fast to my place in our shared story. Inside, I washed the cracked cup carefully, drying it with a soft cloth before returning it to its place of honor on my shelf. It had held wine tonight without spilling a drop. Vessels can be flawed and faithful at the same time. You just need the right hand to lift them. I decided to be my own steady hand. Winter settled over the valley, bringing the quiet contemplation the vines needed to regenerate. The tasting room operated on reduced hours. The hotel hosted intimate weekend retreats rather than large events, and the vineyard workers focused on pruning and repair. It was a season of maintenance and planning, of looking inward while preparing for future growth. One frosty morning, I received an unexpected call from James Chen. "Donna," he said, his usual brisk tone softened with something like concern. "I need to discuss an important matter with you, preferably in person." He arrived at my house 2 hours later, briefcase in hand, his breath visible in the cold air as he walked up the path. I had prepared coffee and set out the almond cookies he favored. Sensing this wasn't a routine legal consultation, after brief pleasantries, he opened his briefcase and removed a folder stamped with the name of a prestigious women's business journal. "They want to profile you," he said, sliding it across the table, "for their annual Invisible Foundations issue, featuring women who built empires without seeking spotlight." I leafed through the proposal, a cover feature, in-depth interview, professional photography at the Vineyard. The focus would be not just on business success, but on the recent wedding situation and how it exemplified issues many women face in family businesses. "They found you through industry channels," James explained. Your suspension order created quite a stir in legal circles. It's being taught in business ethics seminars as a case study in boundary setting and brand protection. I set the folder down, uncertain. I'm not interested in publicity, I said. The Vineyard speaks for itself. James nodded, having anticipated this response. Consider this, Donna. How many other women are facing similar situations, mothers being erased from family celebrations, business owners whose contributions are minimized, widows navigating complex family dynamics without a roadmap? He leaned forward, unusually earnest. Your story could be a guide for others, not because it's perfect, but because it's honest, because you found a way to stand for dignity without burning down relationships. I thought of the letter I had written to my future self and to others facing similar challenges, how I had wanted to share what I'd learned. Still, public exposure felt contrary to everything Robert and I had built a life of quality over prominence, substance over show. I need time to consider this, I told James. Of course, he said, standing to leave. Just remember, silence serves when it protects, but sometimes speaking serves more. My own words echoed back to me, reframed with gentle challenge. I saw him out, promising to think carefully about the offer. That afternoon, I drove to the cemetery where Robert was buried. The modest headstone sat beneath an oak tree that would shade him in summer. I brushed away fallen leaves, traced his name with my fingertip. What would you say about all this? I asked aloud. About magazine profiles and case studies and becoming some kind of reluctant symbol, the wind answered, rustling the remaining oak leaves. I smiled, imagining his practical response. Robert had never cared about recognition, only about doing work that mattered, about leaving things better than he found them. The point isn't fame, I could almost hear him say. The point is usefulness. On my way home, I stopped at Eleanor's house. My sister had always been my sounding board, her perspective balancing my sometimes rigid principles. You're worried about seeming prideful, she observed after I explained the situation. About drawing attention to yourself after years of working quietly. Yes, I admitted. It feels contradictory to everything I've believed in. Eleanor considered this, her hands busy with the knitting that occupied her winter evenings. Donna, remember when you taught Mason to swim, how you stood in the shallow end, arms outstretched, showing him it was possible to float without sinking? I nodded, unsure of her point. This might be like that, she continued. You standing visible, arms outstretched, showing others